Hello, everybody, and welcome to this special edition of the Vape Village podcast. For the next few weeks, we're going to be speaking with some of the presenters for the upcoming Vape State Conference. The theme for this year's conference is taken from the wonderful Station 11 with the theme, Because Survival is Insufficient. On the Saturday of conference, you're going to have the chance to register for some live workshops that'll be covering a whole gamut of, the pressing issues in English education at the moment. And aside from the coronavirus, there is probably no more pressing issue in education than the impact of the Black Lives Matter movement on our teaching and learning, which is why I'm so excited to have Emily and Alex with us today. Emily Frawley, the Vape State President, Alex Bacudra from the University of Melbourne, who also holds several different positions within VATE and 8. So I'll hold off the full bios today. But their session for the Saturday of conference is entitled, and I'm going to read so I don't miss anything, Beyonce and Briggs for the Post-Colonial English Classroom. There's a lot there already in just that title. What was the inspiration for this session?
Can I jump in first, maybe, because you mentioned the Black Lives Matter movement, and that's maybe a good starting point. I was actually talking to some students earlier today in one of my classes who are Muslim, and they stayed behind at the end of the Zoom to say, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement has been so huge this year. We've all been talking to ourselves, and we want to know what the school is actually doing to acknowledge it, and what you think about what we can do to get our voices in the curriculum more. And so I was really glad to be able to say, actually, we've been doing a lot of thinking about that already. We've been developing some new units of work to put into the English curriculum. So I think that's sort of part of what the majority of what our session is looking to do, to speak to those perspectives so that you are able to say to those students in your class that, yes, we're catering to your voices as well, or particularly if you're in a more less multicultural school, that it's even more important that you're getting those perspectives to your students.
And building on that, you know, there are so many opportunities to make connections to our students' everyday textual lives. And that's where the popular culture kind of references come from. You know, some of today's most popular musicians, poets, actors are exploring these themes around Black Lives Matter, Indigenous Australia, colonisation, decolonisation. And they're doing it in very rich, engaging and entertaining ways. And this becomes an opportunity for us to make some connections from the English curriculum and what it is that we want to do with the English curriculum and this aspect of our students' lives that matters to them. And so that's where we're kind of making that connection between popular culture, the English classroom as a political, ideological space, but also where we can use evidence-based practices. You know, we can develop teaching strategies that bridge those kind of three tensions.
I love that idea of, the nexus between the context and the world that our students are living in, and, you know, Emily, that anecdote as well from, the very real lived experience of our students who are calling for this change and the role they can play in that curriculum. One of the things that I know a lot of teachers have talked to me about in the past, particularly when I was doing some work around Maxine Van Clark's Foreign Soil, was a real anxiety, particularly from white teachers who wanted to diversify the curriculum and wanted to ensure that there was representation and cultural diversity in the classroom, but were really anxious about, doing it right. Is that something that either of you have come across in your conversations with teachers?
Yes, and I think if that is anyone listening to this session, podcast, whatever this is right now, then this is going to be the session for you. We're very much going to be focusing on both teaching those sorts of perspectives, but also teaching texts and putting recommendations, a lot of practical recommendations for lesson plans and units and text selection that are by authors who are people of colour.
And Ernest, I'd agree. There are a lot of anxieties around how to do this work because the themes, you know, associated with these movements can be so challenging. And so there's a concern from the perspective of teachers, you know, am I going to do this movement justice? And how can I bring a voice to this particular theme given I haven't experienced the issues that particular groups of people have. And I think that's what Emily said around the how is important. And here's a session where we can get into the how you do this. What are some of the ways that this can be done in a way that does justice to the ideas of the movement, but also develop skills at the same time for students.
And I think, we're talking about some really big concepts here and sort of some big end goals around decolonising the curriculum, for example. But I think the emphasis you both just put, I guess, on taking the first step in our classrooms, in our faculties, in our schools, because it has those very real consequences, to go back to what you started with, Emily, in terms of the students that we're working with every day. Is there anything else we can expect? People may know who Beyonce is. Well, I hope they do. It's criminal if you don't. What about Briggs? People might not have heard of Briggs previously.
He's an Australian senator. Not in the legal sense. That's his Instagram handle. He's a Indigenous songwriter, lyricist, poet who's very much involved in the political landscape of Australia as well. I think it's interesting that we've flagged Beyonce and Briggs, not just for the alliterative connotations there, but in the sense that they're both songwriters. I'm particularly interested in sharing some strategies of working poetry in particular from Black authors and ways of dealing with that. If we talk about teaching this sort of context as being contentious, I think a lot of nervousness is also associated with the teaching of poetry. So maybe we can bring the two of them together.
Absolutely.
One accessible format.
And I think that the huge connection between our First Nations writers, songwriters, playwrights that are starting to have a voice in our curriculum and in our text list, but certainly there's a lot of potential, particularly in that 7 to 10 space, I think, to continue to diversify the kind of text we see, but also the connection then between First Nations people in Australia, other voices from people of colour in Australia, from migrant communities, and then also to the rich history of, I guess, literature and Black literature in the United States as well. Fantastic.
Yeah,
and they're entertaining.
For the 7 to 10 years as well, that the focus doesn't have to just be on the suffering that these communities have encountered, but that a lot of it can be quite joyful and positive and framed in terms of achievements and hopes for the future as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Project Lit, which is an awesome project looking at multicultural literature, particularly Black voices in the United States, has really been putting an emphasis on that exact issue lately, that we need to make space for Black joy in the American context, but obviously for that kind of, true representation isn't about suffering and isn't about trauma, and continuing to diversify that. Well, I'm excited. I wish I'm running a competing session, but hopefully I will be able to catch up afterwards with what happens in this session. So again, another plug, as both Alex and Emily have said, doesn't matter what stage you're at with this project of decolonising your curriculum and really diversifying the voices in your classroom, come along to this session to be part of that conversation and to pick up some additional strategies and ideas to inspire you for 2021. So if you're interested in registering, you of course can go through all the usual channels through the VATE website, or have a look for an e-bulletin in your inbox soon. Thank you so much, Emily and Alex, for joining me for yet another Zoom call on a week undoubtedly filled with Zoom calls. Indeed, register for their session, get involved.
See you at the conference.
See you there.